Hello everyone, my name's Clay Wirestone. I'm the opinion editor for Kansas Reflector.
I'm editor Sherman Smith.
And we are finishing up with week 9 of the Kansas Legislature's session and heading into week 10, which actually might end up being it, but we will get back to that in a little bit. First of all, Sherman, how are you doing today?
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Clay.
We are in the brisk breeze of downtown Lawrence here, and looking back at week 9, one of the biggest stories we followed didn't actually take place inside the halls of the Statehouse. It was connected to a courtroom right here in Lawrence, in the district court.
Yeah, this was the anticipated ruling for Senate Bill 244, the anti-trans law, the one that invalidates driver's licenses, police's bathroom use in public buildings. There are a lot of ways the judge could have gone with this. There's a request to pause the law for a couple of weeks at least until more evidence was entered and arguments could be made about whether to more permanently block this law. It was not on the radar, I think, for the judge to decide that Kansans are simply too nice for this to be an issue. But that was part of the ruling. The legal side of the ruling, as the judge said, we just don't have enough evidence before us. There aren't concrete examples for me to say that constitutional rights are being violated yet. We have to take more time to go through that process before he can actually make a more definitive ruling about the constitutional rights at stake here. But there was this whole aside to his ruling where he opined about how he refused to believe that the lesser angels among us would really be as nefarious as the ACLU or Chris Kobach had led him to believe.
And we will allow our viewers to have their own opinions and reactions to that. Also, in the Statehouse itself this last week, Sherman, there was the first appearance, I guess, of a long gestating bill having to do with the state's universities.
Yeah, they managed to keep this off the radar, even though apparently the governor's staff, legislative leaders, Kansas Board of Regents, University of Kansas, Kansas State University, Wichita State University, and some others have been working for about 6 months apparently on legislation that would dramatically change the way the three big universities operate. There's some concessions being made about that law, so it could be amended to actually affect all of the universities. But it would basically, in its original form, would remove the Board of Regents from having any oversight of any money that is not coming from the state. And really, there's a concern here that this is opening the door to private equity firms, particularly for athletics, and just creating all sorts of new revenue streams so that universities could operate off of that funding and be totally independent of state control.
And what's the prospect of that bill? I know there was some back and forth about it in committee this week. What's its status now?
Yeah, there were some concessions being made to still retain some more state oversight, Board of Regents oversight of the universities, and have it apply to all of the universities. There's a plan to pass that out of committee on Monday. There's a sense that this is just like the camel's nose under the tent, right? You get this through this year, and maybe next year they can start getting back to where the big universities really wanted to be with this. But it's really, I think, a symptom of a couple of things. Universities are upset about losing federal research money and having state oversight about, stupid things like whether you're teaching DEI in classes and having pronouns in your signature blocks in your email and those sort of things that they've had to deal with. They don't want to have to deal with that anymore. There's also a kind of arms race for athletics right now where universities are competing with each other to pay their athletes. For a program like KU, of course, if you want to remain one of the top basketball programs in the country, you got to get up to speed with what others are doing. University of Utah has already gone down this route now with a private equity firm for their athletic department. We'll see what happens with this bill.
Well, and I mean, ultimately, kind of as you were kind of hinting at there, Sherman, there's just this whole factor with state universities where, the state has for years, if not decades, been funding less and less each year to its public universities. So at a certain point, the universities, are no longer really beholden to the state for the majority of their money. And are looking for other avenues that perhaps reduce some then state oversight or state regulations.
Yeah, there's still a lot of concerns and skeptics to this. What does this mean for tuition, for instance? But the problem is, because this was sort of intentionally withheld from the public until the last possible second, it was introduced and then given a hearing the next day, and the intent had been to pass this a day after it was introduced, just to fast track it out before anybody could say, wait a second, we don't like this, what's going on here? If this had gone through the normal process, they had introduced this in January, as they could have, maybe all of those fears would have been set aside by now. We don't really know if the skeptics and critics of this have a reason to be skeptical or not, because it's been kept in the dark this whole time.
So what else, Sherman? What else from this past week were we keeping track of?
One of the other big things that's going on, and we've talked about this on previous episodes of this weekly report, but everybody out there wants to know what they're doing about property tax. The short answer is there's not much that they can do. The only property tax that the state manages is a 20 mil levy that funds schools, which they're obligated to do under the Constitution. They've looked at that. They've also looked at, perhaps telling local governments what they're allowed to do with their property tax. So the Senate had a constitutional amendment that they'd passed that said you're not allowed to raise valuations, the assessed value of your house, more than 3% in any given year. The House passed a bill that said if you do raise above 3%, then a small group of local voters can sign a petition and force a public vote on that tax increase. The House took up the Senate's property tax constitutional amendment idea and shot it down. So the Senate responded by pulling the House bill off of its calendar. They passed it over. At this point, looks like they're not even going to consider it in retaliation for the House not liking their idea. There are a number of other bills out there. One of our reporters, Anna Kaminsky, this week wrote about property tax hearings in the Senate Tax Committee, where they're looking at things like completely abolishing that 20 mil state mill levy property tax that funds schools and replacing it with some tiers of sales tax. They're not actually giving you a tax cut, they're just shifting the burden around, and as it was written, it would create like a $7 billion budget deficit right away. So everybody recognizes this isn't really feasible, but at least they can say they talked about it.
Well, but kind of more broadly, this is where we start getting into one of the aspects of the session I always find interesting, which is in these last couple of weeks of the session, usually you begin to see, not party on party tension, although that always exists, but you're beginning to see chamber on chamber tension, and kind of the way, what the Senate wants versus what the House wants. I think the House tends to be perhaps a little more populist sometimes in its leanings. It has more members, a little closer, more closely connected to their constituents perhaps. And then the Senate tends to, because again, it's a smaller club, tends to think a little more highly of itself. So you get just some friction there.
Yeah, I think for Senate Republicans, it's easy to hold 31 people together with a shared interest, a common idea. You can tailor bills or legislation that will get 30 people on board with it. The House has a much harder task of having 80, 90 Republicans that have a broader spectrum of beliefs and ideas, and they've got to get all of them together on something if they want to be able to override a veto, and that's a much harder task.
So looking ahead to this week, the 10th week of the legislative session, here on Monday, we're going to have a hearing on a bill that actually, what the bill does perhaps is not as clear from reading its text as one might hope, but it could end up affecting journalists.
Yeah, the Kansas Press Association has sounded the alarm on this one. It's a bill that has already passed the Senate, now being looked at in the House. It's designed to protect first responders from interference, but it's written in a way that would potentially make it illegal for a journalist to approach a police officer and ask a question. There's some language in there about a 25-foot buffer, and if a police officer or a first responder just feels threatened, you've committed a crime if you're within 25 feet of them. there's a lot of stuff that is concerning about this. There's also a provision that looks like if this applies to federal agents, anybody who's an onlooker when ICE is rounding up detainees could be just simply thrown in jail for committing a crime just for being there and watching.
Well, and this is one of those bills. It's perhaps, at least to my eyes, very clearly motivated by some of what we've seen in terms of clashes between protesters and immigration enforcement officers, as you say, and yet, having this kind of access to people who have the public trust to keep safety is a pretty bedrock principle.
Yes. When you say it out loud, it sounds bad.
What else? What else is on the docket?
Yeah, there's a joint hearing on Monday. Again, another bill that just kind of seems to come out of nowhere at the last second. This is one that aims to hold social media companies, platforms responsible for the information that is in advertisements on those platforms, and to try to make sure there's no disinformation or misinformation in those ads.
And of course, we already had a hearing, I believe, earlier this session on App Store. I believe was App Store age verification.
Yeah, that was about making sure that you proved you were 18 before downloading any apps on your phone. So it's another crack at social media. This one is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. First, there's a real physician heal thyself kind of element to this. Political ads from the very people who are voting on this are notoriously the most unreliable information you can find. Secondly, it's not that long ago, going back to the pandemic, where we had legislators who were posting outrageous misinformation about the coronavirus and about vaccines. We had a state senator who said that the vaccine would rewrite your DNA, which is absolutely not true. Facebook took that comment down. This actually led to proposed legislation that was not passed but talked about that would try to restrict social media from policing what was on their platforms in this way. Now we're telling them you have to police information on your platforms. Very curious to see what this is all about.
Well, and as always, the definition of what misinformation is perhaps the key point. But then finally, coming back to where we started, there is an indication, however slight, no one has come out and actually said this at the moment, but it theoretically could be this is the last full-time session week of this year.
Yeah, they're planning to, the House and Senate are planning to do, have scheduled on the calendars a lot of work on the floor this week, particularly all day Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. The Senate, I believe, actually said this morning, as we're taping on the Friday the 13th, that their plan is to wrap up on Thursday and be done with the session. When we say done with the session, they of course come back a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks after they end, so they can override any vetoes from the governor that they want to try to override. But this could be the last week of the session.
And that would be something. It would be at least a week earlier than they were originally thinking.
Yeah, it would be 1 week earlier, but also just a blisteringly fast pace compared to anything in recent history.
We should also note, by the way, thank you so much to all of our friends in Salina. We were out in Salina this last week.
That's right.
On Wednesday night at Red Fern Booksellers, and had a wonderful time seeing everyone there.
Yeah, we go around the state to talk a little bit about our work and to field questions in a town hall style format with folks. We love hearing from people, and if there's anybody out there who is interested in bringing us, reach out to me at my email address. It's smith@kansasreflector.com.
We'll put it right down here.
There you go. Yes. Email me and we can talk about that. We just ask that it's open and free to the public.
And while we've obviously been quite busy with the session these last couple of months, as the session winds down, we certainly have more time and availability to go out and meet folks.
Absolutely.
If you want to keep track of all the stuff that's going on, please subscribe to our newsletter, kansasreflector.com/subscribe. That's kansasreflector.com/subscribe. We send out a daily newsletter and round up all of our stories and commentaries for each day. Sherman, any other thoughts, benedictions, blessings for the masses as we conclude today?
You know, Clay, we weren't really sure how these videos were going to work out when we launched them at the beginning of the year. I'm glad that we've taken this initiative up, and thank you to all of you who have been watching these and commenting on them and giving us feedback.
Thanks so much. This isn't the last video though, as much as you may want it to be. We'll be back.
We will.
Okay.